The ocean doesn't like to speak. It prefers to listen, claiming ships and destinies for its silent, icy abyss. But there are some it takes in complete silence. Submarines. Steel predators, designed to glide in the darkness, invisible and unheard. When they vanish, they leave no oil slicks, no debris, no cries over the airwaves. They simply dissolve into the water, turning into steel coffins, sealed by hundreds of atmospheres of pressure. For decades, their fate remains a mystery, their crews' names merely entries on lists of the missing. But sometimes, thanks to the persistence of explorers and technologies that pierce the eternal night, the ocean reluctantly yields its secrets. And then from the darkness they appear, titans of the deep, whose twisted hulls tell stories of their last, desperate moments. Before we continue, please consider giving us a like and subscribing. It's the best way to support us. Thank you. Join us as we descend to the ocean floor to examine recently discovered submarines and hear their silent stories. We begin with a legend of the American submarine fleet, a boat whose name struck superstitious fear into the Japanese. The USS Wahoo, under the command of the legendary and relentless Dudley Mush Morton. The Wahoo became a true nightmare for Japanese shipping. Morton scorned conventions. He attacked convoys on the surface, using the deck gun, effectively transforming the submarine into a torpedo boat. In its first patrols, the Wahoo sank more enemy vessels than any other American submarine. But in October 1943, during its 7th combat patrol, luck turned against them. The Wahoo entered the Sea of Japan through the Leperau Strait, aiming to cause a real massacre there. And it did, sinking at least 4 ships. But upon exiting the strait, on October 11th, the submarine vanished. It simply stopped communicating. What happened to it remained a mystery for over 60 years. There were only Japanese reports of an anti-submarine operation in the strait, with attacks from the air and depth charges dropped. In 2006, an international team of researchers, using the latest sonars, began methodically sweeping the seabed of the Leperau Strait. And they found it. At a depth of 65 meters lay the twisted hull of the Wahoo. High-resolution images told the story of her final moments. It appears the submarine was attempting to break through on the surface when it was spotted by a Japanese patrol plane. A direct hit from an aerial bomb near the stern, close to the engine room, proved fatal. The legendary hunter became the hunted. The discovery of the Wahoo closed the last chapter in the history of one of World War II's most celebrated submarines, and finally brought peace to the families of the 80 sailors, who had been listed as missing in action for decades. If the loss of the Wahoo was a tragedy of war, then the disappearance of the Soviet submarine, K-1-20-9, became the catalyst for one of the Cold War's most audacious and incredible spy thrillers. In March 1968, the diesel-electric submarine K-129, carrying nuclear ballistic missiles, suddenly disappeared while on combat patrol in the Pacific Ocean. The Soviet fleet launched a massive search operation but found no trace. However, the Americans heard everything. Their ultra-sensitive SOSUS hydrophone system detected the sound of an explosion on board the submarine. They knew its exact coordinates. And then, deep within the CIA, a plan was born. So ambitious it seemed insane to raise a Soviet submarine from a depth of 5 kilometers. This was a technologically impossible task. But the CIA decided to pursue it. For this, a special ship, the Glomar Explorer, equipped with a gigantic underwater claw, was built. To conceal the true purpose of the operation, a cover story was created. Reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes was supposedly building this vessel to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor. The project was codenamed Azorian. In 1974, 6 years after the disaster, the Glomar explorer arrived at the site. The operation was on the verge of failure. The giant claw didn't fully engage, and during the ascent, the submarine's hull broke apart. Most of it, including the missile section, plunged back to the bottom. But the Americans still managed to raise the bow section. They recovered the bodies of several Soviet sailors, who were later buried at sea with honors, to nuclear-tipped torpedoes and cryptographic machines. Declassified only decades later, Operation Azorian is still considered one of the most complex and expensive covert operations in history. And the fate of the K-129 is a vivid example of the incredible technological lengths superpowers went to in the icy grip of the Cold War. Some submarines disappear in the thunder of battle, others in espionage intrigues. And some simply vanish into silence, leaving behind only one question: how? Such is the story of HMAS A1, the first submarine in the history of the Australian fleet. At the very start of World War I, on September 14, 1914, this brand-new submarine, along with a destroyer, set out on patrol off the coast of New Guinea. In the middle of the day, it was last seen from the destroyer, and no one ever saw it again. It disappeared without a distress signal, without witnesses, without a single trace. This became Australia's first combat loss in World War I, and its oldest naval mystery. What could have happened? An accidental dive? A torpedo explosion? The mystery plagued Australians for over a century. 13 search expeditions were launched, but all were unsuccessful. Only in December 2017, 103 years after its disappearance, did another, the most technologically advanced expedition, finally succeed. At a depth of 300 meters off the Duke of York Islands, the nearly intact hull of the A1 was discovered. It lay on the seabed, upright and proud, as if merely asleep. Examination of the wreckage indicated that, most likely, the cause of its demise was a technical failure. Perhaps a faulty vent valve led to an uncontrolled dive that dragged the submarine to an extreme depth, where its hull was crushed by pressure. 35 Australian and British sailors were on board. The finding of the A1 became a national event in Australia, closing a tragic chapter in its history and bringing the names of its first submariner heroes back from oblivion. The story of the next submarine isn't just about a discovery. It's a tale of incredible perseverance and filial love that achieved what an entire fleet could not. This is the story of the USS Grunion. In July 1942, during its first combat patrol near the Aleutian Islands, the submarine, under the command of Manor Tabeel, successfully sank several Japanese ships. But after that, it received orders to return to Pearl Harbor and vanished. For decades, its fate was unknown. Captain Abiel left behind 3 sons. They grew up without ever knowing what happened to their father, and they dedicated their lives to finding him. The Abiel brothers, Bruce, Brad, and John, began their own investigation. They weren't marine archaeologists, but they had what others didn't: boundless motivation. They studied all declassified archives, but the key to the mystery came from the most unexpected place: the Internet. They stumbled upon a translated article by a Japanese historian describing a battle between the Japanese transport Konomaru and an American submarine. It turned out that the transport was not sunk as previously thought, but managed to damage the submarine with its gun and observed it sinking after an explosion of its own torpedo, which likely circled back and hit its side. The Abiel brothers contacted a Japanese enthusiast who helped them find the precise coordinates of this battle. Raising money, they hired a vessel with deep-sea robots, and in 2006, They went to the specified area, and they found her. At a depth of nearly 1 kilometer lay their father. Or rather, his ship. The wreckage fully confirmed the Japanese version. The discovery of the Grunion became a triumph of citizen science and an incredibly touching conclusion to the personal story of a family who, for over 60 years, refused to believe that their father had simply disappeared. We've already told you about the Japanese I-400 class submarine aircraft carriers. But the story of their discovery deserves a separate account. These giants, capable of carrying 3 bombers, were the pinnacle of Japanese engineering. After Japan's surrender, 5 such unique submarines, including the flagship I-400 and its sister ship I-401, surrendered to the Americans. American engineers were shocked by what they saw. The technologies used in these submarines were ahead of their time. But the Cold War was beginning. The Soviet Union, according to agreements, demanded access to captured Japanese weapons. The Americans could not allow the secrets of these submarine aircraft carriers to fall into the hands of a potential adversary. So they made a decision to destroy them. In 1946, off the coast of the Hawaiian Islands, all 5 submarines were torpedoed and scuttled. Their exact coordinates were classified.
For decades, these underwater leviathans became a legend, steel phantoms resting somewhere in the Hawaiian depths. But in the early 2000s, a team from the Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory using deep-sea submersibles began their search. In 2005, they found the I-401. In 2013, almost by chance, they stumbled upon the I-400. The footage captured by the robots is astonishing. A gigantic, almost intact hull, a massive cylindrical hangar for aircraft. The appearance of these titans from the darkness became one of the greatest moments in marine archaeology. Their discovery didn't just confirm a legend. It allowed us to touch upon one of the boldest and most futuristic projects of World War II, which fortunately for the Allies, never had the chance to unleash its full power. Sometimes ships are found not where they are sought, and their discovery completely overturns our historical knowledge. Such is the fate of the German submarine U-166. In the summer of 1942, German Wolfpacks caused a real massacre off the U.S. coast, including in the Gulf of Mexico. The U-166 was one of these hunters. In its brief career, it managed to sink for ships. On July 30th, it torpedoed the passenger liner Robert E. Lee, but the U.S. Coast Guard escort ship Patrol 30 immediately counterattacked, dropping depth charges. Pilots of a patrol plane reported seeing a large oil slick on the water. Everyone was sure that the U-166 was sunk right there. The crew of Patrol 30 was credited with the victory. And so, this story entered the history books. But in 2001, nearly 60 years later, an oil company conducting surveys for pipeline installation on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico stumbled upon an unknown submarine. This was 200 kilometers from its presumed sinking location. Research showed that this was indeed the German submarine. It lay alongside its last victim, the liner Robert E. Lee. What really happened? It turned out that the attack by Patrol 30 caused no harm to the submarine. It escaped unscathed, and 2 days later, it was sunk either by one of its own torpedoes, which malfunctioned and exploded immediately after launch, or by a torpedo fired from another unknown American submarine. The attack for which the crew of Patrol 30 received awards was directed at an entirely different German submarine, the U-171, which was unharmed. The discovery of the U-166 not only found a lost submarine, but completely rewrote the history of one of World War II's naval battles, showing how the fog of war can conceal the truth for decades. We will conclude our journey aboard a submarine whose sinking became one of the most tragic chapters in the history of the Soviet submarine fleet and whose wreckage still poses a threat to the entire world. The nuclear submarine K-278 Komsomolets. This was a unique vessel, the pride of Soviet industry. Its hull was made of titanium alloy, allowing it to dive to a record depth of over 1,000 meters, making it invulnerable to any enemy weapon. But on April 7, 1989, in the Norwegian Sea, a disaster occurred aboard this marvel of engineering. A fire broke out in one of the stern compartments. The flames spread instantly, damaging control systems and causing a short circuit. The submarine lost power and was forced to surface emergently. For 6 hours, the crew fought a heroic, desperate battle for the ship's survival. They extinguished the fire, sealed compartments, and tried to activate emergency systems. But all was in vain. The fire reached key systems, and the Komsomolets began to sink. Out of 69 crew members, 42 perished. Some burned in the fire, but most died of hypothermia in the icy water, waiting for help that came too late. The Komsomolets sank to a depth of 1,700 meters, taking not only the lives of the sailors, but also its nuclear reactor and nuclear-tipped torpedoes to the bottom. For decades, its wreck site has been under close observation. In 2019, a Norwegian expedition used a deep-sea submersible to conduct a detailed examination of the wreckage. The footage showed the twisted titanium hull, but most alarming were the water analyses, which showed significantly elevated radiation levels. The reactor and nuclear weapons had begun to deteriorate. The Komsomolets is not just a found submarine. It's a ticking radiological bomb on the ocean floor, a chilling ghost of the Cold War that continues to threaten the world even after its demise. Your support, a like and subscription, means a lot to us. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our new videos.